which is a good segue
Absolutely.
to talk about one of your recent experiments with Jimmy Moore you did with about like consuming high amounts of protein. So can you tell us like
Yeah.
why did you do it and what were the results?
Yeah. We got a lot of backlash for doing it, but so basically, so Jimmy Moore and I are doing a podcast called the Keto Hacking MD podcast, and what we're trying to show is that a ketogenic lifestyle is extremely important. It's the basis for pretty much everything. But if you just do nutrition in a bubble and you don't start addressing other things in life, that modern life that are affecting us, like sleep, stress reduction, exercise, that you're probably going to stall and not have the degree of success that you're looking for. So one of the experiments that we did was a 3-to-1 protein to fat ratio. So Dr. Ted Naiman sometimes will recommend for a short period of time for his patients to do this kind of diet where you're basically trying to increase metabolism and lose body fat. And so we wanted to test this theory because in the keto world right now there is this question of, is protein or fat really the predominant macronutrient that causes satiety? And one of the things that we've noticed is that with the advent of MCT oils and a lot of these shakes, people are starting to down high levels of fat calories in liquid form. And yeah, they're getting ketones from the MCT, but is that actually really healthy, and are they going to lose weight, which is a lot of what people do keto for. And so we wanted to see, okay, does protein cause satiety? Is there a negative outcome from doing a very high protein diet? So the 3 grams to 1 gram protein to fat ratio, and we basically eliminated carbohydrates to try to get rid of that confounding variable. In his protocol, he does recommend 30 grams of carbohydrates. So Jimmy Moore is on one scale, still struggling with some weight loss. Does have some insulin resistance. And then on my end, I have very low body fat percentage and no more insulin resistance. And so we wanted to see the different range and what the response would be. So, and we documented this with blood ketone levels and a Freestyle Libre flash glucose monitor. So it's not continuous. You have to put the monitor over it, but I'm so OCD that I checked it every 2 minutes. So I had a pretty good documentation. And before we started, I did a body impedance analysis. So I have a machine that does basically body fat percentage, lean muscle mass, water weight. And so my body fat percentage was about 8%. So I was very keto adapted. My initial ketone levels were very high in the 4s, and my glucose usually ranges about 60 fasting in the morning. So what I noticed personally was that consuming that much protein, which for me was about 195 grams, and no fat essentially, or very little fat, about 60 grams of fat, I had precipitous drop in my ketones, my glucose level started going up, and I felt really bad. And so I tell the story that before I became keto adapted, I would eat a meal, post-meal I would have a hypoglycemic episode, I would have that postprandial stupor, I would feel horrible, and then I would be hungry 30 minutes later, which is classic, right? Since being keto for 13 years, I do not get that experience anymore. I do not get that postprandial stupor. And so when I started eating this way again, that's what happened. I started feeling kind of full, but not in the full sense where I feel keto adapted and I'm just at a good energy level. I had that kind of heavy stomach, and then afterwards I would feel hungry 30 minutes later, and my appetite level actually increased. So I was hungry more frequently, and I was starting to think about food again. So I went to 7 days, did add some lean body mass, about 1.5 pounds, and did drop a little bit in terms of fat mass, although there is some variable degree of uncertainty with the test. So whether or not I actually did that, I don't know. But I felt like I had more muscle mass. But the takeaway for me was that I didn't like the way I felt again. So I didn't like feeling like I was always thinking about food. I was always hungry or having that postprandial stupor. Jimmy, on the other hand, had a much different experience where he became hypoglycemic very quickly and symptomatic from it with his blood glucose in the 50s, still maintaining ketones in the 1 to 1.5 range. He had to eat much higher levels of protein because of his lean body mass. He's 6'3" and he's a bigger guy. But he had a pretty bad experience. And so I think what we were trying to show is that doing high protein may not be a very safe thing if you have insulin resistance and possible
Right.
glucagon resistance as well.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's
So
yeah.
that's kind
I think like the reason why you experience this hypoglycemia and hungriness is that you kind of kick yourself out of ketosis with consuming that much protein, and that's going to trigger your body to go over into the sugar burning mode again. And because you're eating like zero carbs and little to no fat,
Yep.
then your body doesn't have access to any energy, and basically
Correct.
that's going to cause like maybe even like muscle catabolism in some cases, I would believe.
Yeah, and you get almost it's called rabbit starvation,
Yeah.
right? So the old kind of hunter gatherers knew this, that if they just ate protein by itself, high levels of protein, then they would feel bad, tired. But as soon as they started implementing fat into their diet, and if you do a 1-to-1 ratio, which is essentially ketogenic,
Mhm.
then that's a different story, and you could probably consume a higher level of protein without having the impact like I had or Jimmy had. And that's one of the things that I think is not talked about enough, is that the hunter-gatherer society, they would eat mostly the organ meats. They would eat the liver, the adrenal glands, the tongue, the parts of the animal that had the heart that had a lot of fat,
Mm.
and then the lean muscle they would throw to the dogs. So it's important to have this ratio where you need fat, and you need fat for hormone production, for your brain, for every function in the body, but you also do need some protein. And I think my takeaway from it, the positive takeaway, was that I've increased my protein intake a little bit. I was probably underdoing it some.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like there is like fear amongst keto people that don't eat too much protein because of gluconeogenesis
Right.
and things like that. But in reality, it's not like a strict line where if you surpass it even by an inch, you're gonna get kicked out of ketosis. There's like quite a big buffer zone in the sense. I could imagine you could consume like in your example, you were saying you consume like 190 grams of protein every day. So I would
Yeah.
suggest like maybe if you stay around 170 and 180, you can safely be always in this keto state all the time still.
Yeah, yeah, and I think obviously taking into account exercise, activity level, how much fat you're consuming. I do a BMR, so I know kind of my basic metabolic rate around what it is. I'm not trying to lose weight. I'm trying to maintain where I'm at. So I can get into a situation where I can calculate exactly how much I probably can consume. I've done this for so long that I don't need to calculate, and part of what I really like about it is that I know exactly what works for me. So I don't have to sit there and do my macros and calculate, unless I'm doing an experiment where then I kind of want to document, okay, this is what's happening. This is what I'm consuming, so that people understand, okay, this is what has changed. But yeah, I think protein, and it's still debated in the internet circles, and I think we're probably overdoing it in terms of how much debate we're doing. I think consume protein. Don't do 300 grams of protein. There's really no need for it.
Yeah.
Protein is not your enemy. As long as you're consuming healthy fats with it, is really the
I
takeaway.
think it's much more healthier and much more effective to be focusing on eating these fattier chunks of meat and other animal sources rather than putting on extra MCT oil and extra butter on top of all of your foods, because it promotes other metabolic pathways that are associated with health and lower body fat and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of part of what I mentioned earlier, where with the really push for MCT products, bulletproof coffee,
Right.
all these products, which I'll be the first to say I have some MCT oil in my morning coffee. Right now I'm doing more of a matcha tea because I'm trying to get the antioxidants, but you can have a little bit, just don't make that your primary source of nutrition and then skip on the protein because you want to stay in ketosis. I think that's what we're seeing, and especially when you have keto becoming so popular, a lot of products coming to market, and that's the danger. And so I can understand from the protein camp of the guys like Keto Gains and who are promoting more of a 1-to-1 diet, that you need to have protein. Don't skip out on the protein. And you see that also in the carnivore diet, that people are really starting to gravitate towards 2 because that's essentially what they're doing, right? They're doing 1-to-1 ratio, fatty chunks of meat, getting the quality of meat. The other thing I'd like to say just on in terms of oils is that, or fats, is that, you know, we've been telling people that saturated fats are extremely dangerous, but we have to be careful now that we don't just do MCT-based oils as our own source of fat. We need to have a wide range of, you know, saturated, polyunsaturated, and unsaturated fats.
Yeah, and I fear like there's definitely a lot of confirmation bias in all camps of this discussion, like especially
Sure.
like the carnivore diet. They're definitely gonna very, oh yeah, we can eat a lot of more protein and we can eat more meat and stuff like that.
I love protein.
Or you need only a certain amount of protein every day, and any excess doesn't benefit you that much. So
Protein rocks.
Correct. And then, you know, the flip side is, what about mTOR activation?
Right.
You know, is there an issue in terms of longevity? What about, you know, from an ecological standpoint, are we going to be consuming so much meat that it's becoming, you know, detriment to our environment? So I personally, I'm not opposed to people saying I want to do carnivore versus a Western diet. If you had to choose between the two, carnivore hands down.
Yeah.
For me personally, I like a variety of foods. So I like to have other foods in my diet. And so eating meat, only meat for the rest of my life, I don't think I would like to do that.
And I also like to think that implementing these different plants and herbs and vegetables, they have like a much more net positive effect on your longevity and your gut microbiome and things like that.
Right.
By, you know, making your metabolism more robust as well.
Yeah, and there are, you know, quite a bit of studies in terms of the gut microbe that, you know, having healthy carbohydrates, healthy fiber is essential for them to survive and thrive. You know, people say, well, I'll just take a probiotic and that'll be the answer. And the reality is most probiotics are just 4 strains, and by the time they get to the colon, which is where you need them, they're all dead anyways because of the stomach acid and the transition. There are some newer kind of products that are coming to the market that are much higher concentration, and they seem to have some benefit in terms of populating the colon. But I would rather do it from a natural source of you know, healthy carbohydrates like greens, vegetables, asparagus, things like that, where you get more of the micronutrients as well, which are essential.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you get them in a more balanced ratio as well, in a more natural way. And
yeah, and I think, you know, you really want to go back to eating real food, you know, not processed, not trying to hit your macros so you avoid carbohydrates completely. You know, obviously staying away from the refined products and grains and, you know, legumes and stuff like that. But real food is where it's at. You know, you can get rid of 90% of your liver and still function. If you get rid of 1 more percent, you have full-blown liver failure and you die. A lot of people do not understand that being in ketosis doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lose fat. Why is our insulin elevated? Why is our glucose elevated? We're just treating the number. And that, I think, we need to get away from, and we need to start focusing on the underlying cause, which everything that you and I have talked about on this podcast. If you think about it, a lot of theories that are discounted in the past in the medical community come back around, you know, 50, 100, 200 years later. And for some reason, we realize, oh, you know what? That guy who was saying this was actually right. The monks used to go and meditate and reach nirvana. Well, I'm assuming probably some of that nirvana is because they were in deep ketosis. They weren't eating.